I think that Canada could best serve the interests of peace through some subtle tweakings of its already extant domestic and foreign policies. Grander pronouncements tend to be fanciful, and the general temptation seems to be to err on the side of comfortable dogmas. Nothing, I suggest, would be hugely destructive of the status quo. I conceive of this as being a philosophical realignment more so than a revolution. This is Canada, after all. In order to effect change, we need true independence of policy, which will require a major overhaul of our armed forces. As it is, the military, for better or worse, a vital organ in policy making, depends on the assistance of other powers to mobilize. This limits our ability to operate as a true international player. How can we expect to be taken seriously if we're the parasitic twin of a real power? Decisiveness is even more important. All too often, the failure of the West and the Third World is the result of our addiction to half measures. Democracy is marketing and discontinuity. After hemorrhaging materiel and cash on Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation, the Americans lost interest and thus paved the way to the rise of the Taliban. Presently, NATO's slipshod, perfunctory efforts in the Afghan civil war guarantees to prolong the conflict well beyond its natural course. Peacekeeping is a laudable legacy of the Cold War, but alas, we no longer have the luxury of even the most conceptually pleasing forms of non-commitment. The Balkan Wars should have driven this home. The slaughter in Rwanda should have nailed the coffin shut. A more active diplomatic engagement must be sought in the Third World, belligerently if necessary. We traditionally reserve charity for our interactions with less fortunate nations. Charity is based on asymmetric relations, and to some extent presupposes the hopelessness of the beneficiary ever finding equal footing. Scrap charity for responsibility. We must create a healthy democratic bulwark in the Third World. In order for changes to occur, we need a new philosophical framework to prosecute interventionist policy. We won't be keeping the peace, but extending its domain. It is a responsibility. Poverty and education are not necessarily at the root of global crises that we're faced with today. There is some correlation insofar as they can be traced to the deformity wrought by colonialism and neocolonialism, but correlation does not equal causation. The Middle East is very far from being the poorest region on earth. Uganda and Rwanda are among the more bountiful lands in Africa. Blaming everything on poverty and ignorance is a very comfortable, middle-class, positivist approach, and it's no surprise that it's favored by so many Canadian kids. The historicity of other people can be underplayed, and our role as the great white saviors underscored. But isn't that just another face of colonialist ethnocentrism? And we really aren't in any position to prescribe anyone else's education, since our own flock is so terribly misinformed. This is a credulous age everywhere, and not just in the Middle East.